The woman's body hit Samuel Whitmore's doorframe with a dull thud that sent his hand flying to the revolver at his hip. But before he could draw, she pitched forward into the dusty threshold of his ranch house like a marionette with cut strings. He lunged from his chair by the fireplace, his book tumbling to the floor as his calloused hands caught her shoulders just before her face could meet the wooden planks. Her skin burned with fever through the torn fabric of her dress, and her breath came in shallow, desperate gasps that told him she had been running on nothing but willpower for far too long. Samuel lifted her with ease, her weight barely registering as he carried her through the small main room of his Wyoming ranch house toward the bedroom. The year was 1884, and in all his 32 years living in Cody, he had never had a stranger collapse on his doorstep. Her dark hair hung in matted tangles around a face that might have been beautiful if it were not streaked with dirt and drawn tight with exhaustion. Blood stained the hem of her skirts, though whether it was her own or someone else's, he could not tell. He laid her gently on his bed, the rough woolen blankets crinkling beneath her slight form. Her eyes fluttered open for just a moment, revealing a startling shade of green that seemed to pierce straight through him despite their unfocused haze. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracked and raw. "They cannot find me here." Then her eyes rolled back and she went limp against his pillows. Samuel stood frozen for a heartbeat, his mind racing through possibilities. He had built this ranch 5 miles outside of Cody specifically to avoid the complications that came with people, preferring the company of his horses and cattle to the gossip and drama of town life. Yet here was drama personified, bleeding and fevered in his bed, and every instinct told him that whoever she was running from would not stop looking. He forced himself into action, moving to the kitchen to pump water into his washing basin. He grabbed clean cloths from his cabinet and returned to the bedroom, setting everything on the small table beside the bed. Her breathing had evened out slightly, though sweat beaded on her forehead, and her skin still radiated unnatural heat. Samuel had tended enough injured animals and ranch hands over the years to know the basics of care. He soaked a cloth in cool water and began wiping the dirt from her face, revealing features that were indeed striking despite their current state. She looked young, perhaps 23 or 24, with high cheekbones and full lips that were currently cracked from dehydration. A purple bruise shadowed her left cheekbone, and his jaw tightened at the sight. He worked methodically, cleaning her face and hands, checking for injuries. Her palms were raw and bleeding, embedded with small stones and debris as if she had fallen multiple times. Her feet, still clad in worn leather boots, were in even worse condition. When he carefully removed them, he found her stockings soaked with blood from numerous blisters that had burst and reformed. "Christ," he muttered, reaching for the tin of salve he kept for rope burns and scratches. As he tended to her wounds, Samuel found his mind wandering to dangerous places. Who was she? What had driven her to run until her body gave out? The fierce protective instinct that rose in his chest surprised him with its intensity. He had spent the last 8 years alone on this ranch after his parents died, content with his solitude, convinced that connections only led to pain. Yet something about this mysterious woman stirred feelings he thought he had buried alongside his family. The sun was setting by the time he finished cleaning and bandaging her wounds. He had managed to get some water down her throat, and her fever seemed to have dropped slightly, though she remained unconscious. Samuel pulled a chair up beside the bed, his rifle across his lap, and settled in to keep watch. If someone came looking for her, they would have to go through him first. The night passed slowly, broken only by the occasional moan or restless movement from his unexpected guest. Samuel dozed fitfully in his chair, jerking awake at every sound. When dawn finally broke through his bedroom window, painting the room in shades of gold and amber, he stood and stretched his stiff muscles. The woman still slept, but her breathing had deepened and the fever flush had faded from her cheeks. He decided to risk leaving her long enough to tend to his animals and make breakfast. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of sagebrush and pine from the mountains in the distance. His horses whinnied their greetings as he approached the barn, and he fell into the familiar rhythm of feeding and watering them. The physical work helped clear his mind, though he could not stop thinking about the woman in his bed and the trouble that surely followed in her wake. He was walking back to the house with a pail of fresh milk when he saw the dust cloud on the horizon. 3 riders, moving fast, heading in the general direction of his property. Samuel's gut clenched. It could be coincidence, ranchers or cowboys passing through, but his instincts screamed otherwise. He quickened his pace, set the milk inside, and grabbed his rifle and spyglass. From the cover of his barn, he watched the riders approach. They were still too far to make out details, but their purposeful trajectory sent warning bells clanging through his mind. He waited, every muscle tense, as they drew closer. Finally, when they were about a mile out, they veered off, heading toward the Peterson ranch to the south. Samuel released a breath he had not realized he was holding. Not today, then. But they were searching for something, and he would bet his entire herd that something was the woman sleeping in his house. When he returned inside, she was awake. She sat bolt upright in his bed, her green eyes wild with panic, her bandaged hands clutching his blanket to her chest. The moment she saw him, she scrambled backward until her shoulders hit the wall, her breath coming in quick, frightened gasps. "Easy," Samuel said, setting his rifle aside and raising his hands in a calming gesture. "You are safe here. My name is Samuel Whitmore. You collapsed in my doorway last night." She stared at him, her gaze darting between his face and the door behind him, clearly calculating her chances of escape. He could see the moment she realized how thoroughly her body had betrayed her. Pain flashed across her features, and she sagged slightly against the wall. "Where am I?" Her voice was stronger than it had been the night before, but still rough. "My ranch, about 5 miles outside of Cody." "You have been unconscious for nearly 12 hours. He moved slowly to the chair and sat, deliberately making himself less threatening. "What is your name?" She hesitated, and he saw the war play out across her expressive face. Finally, she whispered, "Lydia. Lydia Zimmerman." "Well, Lydia Zimmerman, you were in pretty bad shape when you arrived. Fever, dehydration, and your hands and feet were torn to pieces. How far did you run?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back fiercely. "I do not know, days, I lost track." Her fingers twisted in the blanket. "You should not have helped me. When they find out, they will come for you too." "Who are they?" Lydia looked away, her jaw set in a stubborn line. "It does not matter. I need to leave before they find me here. I have already put you in enough danger." She tried to swing her legs out of bed, but the moment her damaged feet touched the floor, she gasped and would have fallen if Samuel had not crossed the room in 3 quick strides to steady her. This close, he could smell the lavender soap he had used to clean her skin, could see the gold flecks in her green eyes and the determination that burned there despite her obvious pain and fear. "You are not going anywhere on those feet," he said firmly. "Sit down before you hurt yourself worse." "You do not understand," she said, but her legs were shaking so badly she had no choice but to sink back onto the bed. "They will not stop looking. My husband will not let me go." The word husband hit Samuel like a punch to the gut, though he had no right to the jealousy that flared hot in his chest. "He did that to you." He gestured to the bruise on her face, barely restrained fury coloring his voice. Lydia raised a trembling hand to her cheek, as if she had forgotten the mark was there. That and worse. I tried to leave before, but he always found me. This time I waited until he was away on business and I ran. I stole his best horse and rode for 2 days straight before it went lame. Then I walked. Her voice cracked. I just kept walking. I did not know where I was going, only that I had to get away. Samuel returned to his chair, needing the distance to think clearly. Every decent bone in his body demanded he protect her, but he was also practical enough to know that taking on another man's wife could get them both killed, justified or not. Marriage was considered sacred, and the law rarely sided with a woman trying to escape it, regardless of the circumstances. "Where is your husband now?" he asked. "Cheyenne. He owns a freight company there, but he has men who work for him, men who would do anything he asked. I am sure he has them searching for me." She met his eyes, her gaze steady despite the fear he could see lurking beneath. "I am not asking you to fight my battles. Just let me rest for 1 day and I will leave. I will not bring this to your door." "Too late for that," Samuel said. "I saw 3 riders this morning searching the area. They moved on, but they will be back." The color drained from Lydia's face. "Then I need to go now." "And go where? You can barely stand, let alone walk. You would make it maybe a mile before you collapsed again." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I am not turning you out to die, Lydia. That is not who I am." "You do not know what he is capable of," she whispered. "Lawrence Zimmerman gets what he wants always, and right now he wants me back so he can finish what he started." The way she said it, so matter-of-fact and resigned, made Samuel's blood run cold. "He tried to kill you." It was not a question, but she nodded anyway. "He was drunk, angrier than I had ever seen him. He had lost a major contract, and in his mind it was somehow my fault for not being supportive enough, for not entertaining his business partners properly. He started hitting me, and I knew this time he would not stop. I managed to get away and lock myself in the bedroom. When he finally passed out, I took what I could carry and ran." Samuel sat back, processing the information. He had never married, had never even come close, but he understood the sanctity with which society viewed the institution. He also knew men like Lawrence Zimmerman, men who viewed their wives as property to be controlled and punished at will. The law would almost certainly side with the husband, especially if he had money and influence. But Samuel had never been much for following unjust laws. "Here is what is going to happen," he said, his voice carrying the firm decisiveness that had served him well in his years of solitary ranching. "You are going to stay here until you are healed enough to travel safely. In the meantime, I will figure out a way to get you somewhere he cannot find you, maybe California or Oregon, somewhere you can start fresh." Lydia stared at him as if he had grown a second head. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" It was a fair question, and Samuel did not have a good answer. Or rather, he had several answers, none of which he was ready to examine too closely. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said simply. "Now, are you hungry?" "I was making breakfast when you woke up." She nodded slowly, and he saw the moment she decided to trust him, at least temporarily. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly, and she pulled the blanket more securely around herself. "Thank you," she said softly. "I know you do not owe me anything, but thank you." Samuel stood and headed for the kitchen, uncomfortable with her gratitude. He had not done anything yet except provide basic human decency. The real challenge would come when her husband's men inevitably showed up at his door. He made a simple breakfast of eggs, bacon, and fresh bread, carrying it to her on a tray. She ate slowly at first, then with increasing hunger, and he found himself oddly pleased to see color returning to her cheeks. While she ate, He changed into clean clothes and splashed water on his face, using the distraction to gather his thoughts. When he returned to the bedroom, she had finished eating and was attempting to stand again, testing her injured feet with obvious determination. "I need to move around," she said before he could protest. "I cannot just lie in bed. It will make me an easier target." He could not argue with her logic, even if every step she took made her wince. He offered her his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. They walked slowly around the main room of his house, her weight leaning heavily against him. She was several inches shorter than his 6-foot frame, the top of her head barely reaching his shoulder. Despite everything she had been through, or perhaps because of it, he found himself acutely aware of her presence beside him, the warmth of her hand on his arm, the clean scent of her hair. "You live here alone?" she asked, glancing around at the sparse but tidy space. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, flanked by a handmade bookshelf filled with worn volumes. His furniture was simple but sturdy, crafted by his own hands over the years. The kitchen area was separated from the main room by a rough wooden counter, and a single window looked out over the sweeping landscape of sagebrush and distant mountains. "For 8 years now," he confirmed. "My parents died of fever in '76. Left me this land and enough cattle to make a living. No wife, no family, no." The word came out harsher than he intended, and he softened it with an explanation. "I had a girl once back before my parents died, Sarah Mitchell. She married my best friend instead when she decided ranch life was too hard and too lonely." Lydia glanced up at him, her green eyes perceptive. "I am sorry. That must have hurt. It taught me an important lesson about depending on people." He guided her back toward the bedroom, feeling her strength flagging. But that was a long time ago. She settled back onto the bed with a sigh of relief, her face pale from the exertion. "How old are you?" she asked suddenly. 32. "You?" 24. She pulled the blanket over her legs. "I married Lawrence when I was 19. My father had died, and my mother convinced me it was a good match. He seemed charming at first, generous. The violence started after the wedding. By then, it was too late." Samuel felt that now familiar surge of protective anger. It is never too late. "You got away. For now," she said quietly. "But you do not know him. He has connections, money, men willing to do whatever he asks. Even if I make it to California, he could find me. Then we make sure he does not." Samuel pulled the chair closer to the bed. "Tell me everything about him. His habits, his business, who he knows. If we are going to outmaneuver him, I need to know what we are up against." For the next hour, Lydia talked and Samuel listened. Lawrence Zimmerman was 38 years old, the owner of a successful freight company that transported goods throughout Wyoming and the surrounding territories. He was well connected with local politicians and law enforcement, making him effectively untouchable in Cheyenne. He had a violent temper, especially when drinking, and a need to control every aspect of his life, including his wife. According to Lydia, he had been married once before, but his first wife had died in what was ruled an accident, though Lydia suspected darker circumstances. "He has 5 men who work directly for him, not as freight handlers but as personal employees," she said. "They do his dirty work, collect debts, intimidate people. Their leader is a man named Frank Carson, and he is the most dangerous of them all. No conscience, no morals. If Lawrence sent anyone after me, it would be Frank and at least 2 others. 3 riders," Samuel murmured. "Like the ones I saw this morning." Lydia's face went white. "Then they are already here. I need to leave, Samuel, tonight as soon as it gets dark. I will not let you die because of me." "You cannot even walk 100 yards without collapsing," he pointed out. "You would not make it through one night out there, and I am not letting you go alone." "Then what do you suggest?" She sounded frustrated and frightened in equal measure. Samuel stood and paced to the window, looking out at the empty landscape. An idea was forming in his mind, risky but possibly workable. There is a man in Cody, James Hartford. He runs the general store, but he is also a conductor on the Underground Railroad, helping escaped slaves get to freedom. Has been since before the war ended. He has connections, safe houses, people who can move someone quietly from place to place. You think he would help me? I think he would help anyone running from someone who meant them harm. Samuel turned back to face her. I will ride into town tomorrow, talk to him discreetly. In the meantime, you rest and heal. The stronger you are when we move, the better your chances. Lydia studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. I do not understand you, Samuel Whitmore. You are risking everything for someone you just met. Why? It was the second time she had asked, and this time Samuel forced himself to examine his motivations more honestly. Yes, there was the simple moral imperative to help someone in danger, but there was more to it than that. From the moment he had caught her falling body, something had shifted in his carefully constructed solitary world. Her courage, her determination to survive despite overwhelming odds, called to something deep inside him. And when he looked at her, he felt a connection he had not experienced since Sarah broke his heart 8 years ago. It terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. Because you deserve better than what he gave you, Samuel said finally. Because I know what it is like to feel alone and afraid. And because something tells me you are worth fighting for. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and she looked away quickly, as if embarrassed by the emotion. No one has ever fought for me before, she whispered. Then it is about time someone did. The rest of the day passed quietly. Samuel went about his ranch chores while Lydia rested, though he kept his rifle close and his eyes on the horizon. Every dust cloud, every distant sound put him on edge, but no riders appeared. He made them a simple dinner of beans and salt pork, and they ate together at his small table, falling into surprisingly easy conversation. She told him about growing up in Philadelphia, the daughter of a merchant who lost everything in a bad investment. About moving west with her mother after his death, hoping for a fresh start. About meeting Lawrence at a church social and believing his promises of a comfortable, safe life. I was so naive, she said, shaking her head at the memory. I thought he was sophisticated, worldly. I did not see the cruelty underneath until it was too late. You were young and grieving, Samuel replied. He took advantage of that. It is not your fault. She looked at him with something like wonder. Lawrence always said it was my fault, that I provoked him, that I was not a good enough wife. After a while, I started to believe him. He was wrong. Samuel spoke with firm conviction. No one deserves to be beaten, no matter what they do or do not do. That is not marriage. That is not love. That is just a bully with legal permission. Lydia reached across the table and laid her bandaged hand over his. The gesture was brief but electric, sending a jolt of awareness through Samuel's entire body. Thank you, she said softly, for seeing me as more than just someone's property. That night, Samuel insisted she take the bed again while he made himself a pallet on the floor of the main room. He lay awake for hours, listening to the sounds of the night and the soft breathing from the bedroom. His mind churned with plans and contingencies, but underneath, it all ran a current of emotion he was not quite ready to name. He woke before dawn to the sound of horses. Multiple horses, moving fast, heading straight for his property. Samuel was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, moving to the window. In the dim pre-dawn light he could make out 3 riders approaching at a gallop. Lydia, he called sharply, moving to the bedroom. Get up, they are here. She was already awake, her face pale but composed as she swung her legs out of bed. "Where can I hide?" Samuel's mind raced. His house was small with few options for concealment. The barn was too obvious and she could not run in her condition. Then his eyes fell on the narrow door near the fireplace that led to the root cellar. "There," he said, pointing. "It is cramped and dark, but they should not think to look. Take this." He handed her his spare pistol. "If anyone besides me opens that door, shoot them." She took the gun with steady hands and moved as quickly as her injured feet would allow. Samuel helped her down the steep wooden steps into the cool darkness below, where shelves of preserved food and sacks of potatoes lined the earthen walls. "Do not make a sound, no matter what you hear," he instructed. "I will come for you when it is safe." "Be careful," she whispered, and in the darkness he felt her hand brush his cheek in a gesture of affection that sent his heart racing. He closed the door and threw a woven rug over it, then arranged his chair to partially obscure it as well. By the time the riders pounded into his yard, Samuel was standing on his front porch, rifle cradled in his arms, the picture of a man annoyed at being disturbed so early. The three men who dismounted were exactly what he expected. Hard-faced, well-armed, with the look of men who had done violence and would do it again without hesitation. The leader was tall and broad-shouldered, with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw. He had to be Frank Carson. "Morning," Samuel called out, his voice neutral. "Something I can help you with." "Morning," Frank replied, his eyes scanning the property with professional thoroughness. "We are looking for someone. A woman. She ran away from her husband in Cheyenne about 4 days ago. We have reason to believe she might have come through this area." "Have not seen any woman," Samuel said. "Just me and my cattle out here." Frank smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "You will not mind if we take a look around then? Make sure she is not hiding somewhere." "Actually, I do mind." Samuel's voice hardened. "This is my property and you have no authority here. If you want to search it, you can come back with a sheriff and a warrant." The other two men moved to flank Frank, their hands drifting toward their guns. Frank held up a hand to stop them, his smile widening. "No need to be unfriendly, friend. We are just trying to help a distraught husband find his wife. She is not well, might be dangerous to herself. He is very worried about her." "I am sure he is," Samuel said dryly, "but my answer stands. No warrant, no search." Frank's expression darkened. "You are making a mistake. Lawrence Zimmerman is an important man with powerful friends. You do not want him as an enemy." "I do not want anyone as an enemy," Samuel replied. "But I also do not let strangers trample my rights. Now, unless you have other business, I suggest you move on." "I have work to do." For a long, tense moment, Samuel thought Frank might push the issue. His hand tightened on his rifle, and he calculated his chances of taking all three men if shooting started. Not good, but not impossible either. He was on his own land, knew every rock and dip, and he had motivation beyond just survival burning in his chest. Finally, Frank stepped back. "We will be checking all the ranches in the area," he said. "If we find out you have been lying, if we find out you have been harboring her, things will go very badly for you." "Noted," Samuel said coldly. "Good day, gentlemen." He stood on his porch, rifle ready, until they mounted up and rode away. Even then, he waited a full 10 minutes, watching to make sure they did not circle back before he moved back inside and pulled up the rug. "They are gone," he called down into the cellar. "You can come up." Lydia emerged, her face tight with stress but her eyes fierce. "They will be back," she said. "Frank is not the type to give up. He will watch this place, or he will come back at night when you are sleeping. Let him try." Samuel helped her back to the main room, noting how she favored her left foot. "But you are right that we cannot stay here indefinitely. I need to get to town today, talk to James. It is too dangerous. If they are watching, then I will be careful." He moved to the kitchen and began packing supplies. "You stay here, keep the doors and windows locked, and do not answer for anyone but me. I should be back by early afternoon." Lydia caught his arm as he headed for the door. "Samuel, if something happens to you because of me, I will never forgive myself." He looked down at her, at the fear and determination warring in her green eyes, and felt something settle into place in his chest. This was more than just helping a stranger. This was personal now, had been from the moment he caught her falling body and felt the rightness of her weight in his arms. "Nothing is going to happen to me," he said, covering her hand with his. "I have too much to live for now." He left before she could respond, not trusting himself to stay if he saw emotion in her eyes that matched what he was feeling. The ride into Cody took about an hour, and Samuel used the time to watch for anyone following. The landscape was open enough that he could spot riders from a good distance, and he took a deliberately circuitous route that would reveal any tail. Cody was small even by Wyoming standards, consisting of a main street with a handful of businesses and a scattering of houses spreading outward. Samuel tied his horse outside Hartford's general store and went inside, the bell above the door announcing his arrival. James Hartford was a compact man in his mid-50s with sharp blue eyes and a beard going gray. He looked up from the ledger he was working on and smiled in recognition. "Samuel Whitmore, been a while since you have been in town, running low on supplies," something like that. Samuel glanced around, making sure they were alone. "I need to talk to you about something private, very private." James's expression shifted to serious attention. He moved to the door, flipped the sign to closed, and locked it. "Come to the back." In the storage room behind the shop, surrounded by crates and barrels, Samuel laid out the situation. James listened without interruption, his face growing grimmer as the story unfolded. "Lawrence Zimmerman," he said when Samuel finished. "I have heard of him. Rich, connected, and mean as a snake. You have taken on a hell of a problem, Samuel." "I know, but I cannot turn her away. Can you help?" James was quiet for a long moment, thinking. "The network I use is designed for a specific purpose, and it is dangerous to use it for anything else. But the principle is the same, helping people escape from bondage. And what you describe, that is bondage in everything but name." He nodded slowly. "Yes, I can help. I have contacts in Colorado who can get her to California. Once she is there, she can disappear into one of the big cities, start over with a new name." Relief flooded through Samuel. "How soon can you arrange it? Give me 2 days to send telegrams and get responses. In the meantime, keep her hidden and keep yourself alive. If Zimmerman's men are already here, they will not stop looking." James fixed him with a penetrating stare. "You understand what you are risking. If they find out you helped her, they could charge you with kidnapping or theft. You could hang." "I understand." Samuel's voice was steady. "It is worth the risk." "Is she worth it, or is this about something else?" James asked shrewdly. Samuel met his eyes. "Both, maybe. I do not know yet. All I know is that letting her go back to that man would be the same as killing her myself, and I cannot live with that." James clapped him on the shoulder. "Then we will make sure it does not come to that. Come back in 2 days, late afternoon. I should have everything arranged by then." Samuel left the store feeling both relieved and more anxious than before. 2 days felt like an eternity when Frank Carson and his men were prowling the area. He made his way back to his horse, scanning the street out of habit. That was when he saw them. Frank and one of his companions, standing outside the saloon, watching him with undisguised interest. Samuel forced himself to move naturally, untying his horse and mounting up without any sign of haste. He rode out of town at a normal pace, feeling their eyes on his back every step of the way. The ride home seemed to take twice as long as the trip into town. Samuel kept checking behind him, but no one followed. That should have been reassuring, but instead it made him more nervous. Frank was planning something, waiting for something. Samuel just hoped he figured out what before it was too late. When he arrived back at the ranch, he found Lydia sitting by the window with his spare rifle across her lap. She looked up as he entered, relief flooding her face. "You were gone so long," she said. "I was starting to think something had happened. Everything is fine." He told her about his conversation with James, carefully omitting the part where he had been spotted by Frank. No need to worry her more than necessary. 2 days and then we can get you to safety. 2 days, she repeated softly. It seems both too long and too short. Samuel understood exactly what she meant. 2 days in which anything could go wrong. But also 2 days with her, getting to know her better, exploring this connection growing between them before she left his life forever. That thought brought him up short. Forever. The word echoed in his mind with uncomfortable finality. Once she left for California, he would never see her again. It was the right thing, the safe thing, the only logical course of action. So why did it feel like something precious was being torn away? "Samuel," Lydia was watching him with concern. "Are you all right?" "Fine," he lied. "Just tired. It has been a long morning." They spent the rest of the day in quiet domesticity that felt both strange and comfortable. Lydia insisted on helping with simple tasks despite her injuries, refusing to be useless. They prepared meals together, and Samuel found himself telling her stories about his childhood, his parents, the dreams he once had of expanding his ranch into something prosperous and successful. "Why did you not?" she asked as they sat together after dinner, the sun setting in brilliant shades of orange and purple outside the window. "After Sarah left, I lost my taste for dreaming," he admitted. "It seemed safer to keep everything small and manageable, just me and the animals. No one to disappoint, no one to abandon me. That sounds lonely." "It is," he said, surprised by his own honesty. "But lonely feels safer than heartbroken." Lydia was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the table. "I understand that. After I realized what my marriage really was, I stopped dreaming too. I just focused on surviving one day at a time. But sometimes, late at night, I would imagine what my life could have been like if I had made different choices, if I had been braver sooner." "You are brave now," Samuel said firmly. "Running the way you did, surviving for days on your own, that takes courage most people do not have." She looked at him, and in the fading light, her eyes seemed to hold a depth of emotion that made his breath catch. "I only found that courage because I had nothing left to lose." "But you had everything to lose and helped me anyway. That is real bravery." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, and Samuel lit the oil lamps. He found himself reluctant to suggest she go to bed, wanting to stretch these moments out as long as possible. But exhaustion was evident in the lines of her face, and finally he could not in good conscience keep her up any longer. "You should rest," he said reluctantly. "Build up your strength. Will you sit with me for a while?" The request was tentative, almost shy. "I do not want to be alone with my thoughts yet." So Samuel pulled his chair into the bedroom and sat while Lydia settled under the blankets. They talked about small things, inconsequential things, but underneath ran a current of connection that grew stronger with each passing moment. Her laugh, when he managed to coax it out with a funny story about a particularly stubborn cow, was like music. Her smile transformed her face from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. Eventually, her eyes grew heavy, and her words began to slur with sleep. Samuel stood to leave, but her hand shot out and caught his. "Thank you," she murmured, already half asleep, "for everything, for seeing me, for caring." He squeezed her hand gently, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "Sleep well, Lydia. That night, lying on his pallet in the main room, Samuel faced the truth he had been avoiding all day. He was falling for her. It was absurd, impossible, and completely impractical. She would be gone in 2 days, starting a new life far away, and he would be here, alone again on his ranch. There was no future in these feelings, nothing but heartache waiting, but knowing that did not make the feelings any less real. He woke to chaos. Smoke, thick and acrid, burning his lungs and stinging his eyes. For a moment, Samuel was disoriented, unsure what was happening. Then he heard the crackle of flames and reality crashed down on him. The house was on fire. He lunged to his feet, grabbing his rifle and coat. "Lydia!" he shouted, stumbling toward the bedroom through the thickening smoke. "Lydia, wake up!" She was already awake, coughing and trying to orient herself in the dark, smoke-filled room. Samuel grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the front door, but flames licked up the door frame, blocking their exit. The back window was their only option. "Come on." He practically carried her to the bedroom window, smashing it open with the butt of his rifle. Glass shattered outward and cool night air rushed in, momentarily clearing the smoke. "Climb through. I will catch you." Lydia did not waste time arguing. She climbed onto the sill, her injured feet making her clumsy, and tumbled through. Samuel dropped his rifle out after her, then followed, hitting the ground hard enough to jar his teeth. He grabbed Lydia's arm and dragged her away from the burning house toward the barn. That was when the first shot rang out. The bullet kicked up dirt near Samuel's feet, and he shoved Lydia behind him, cursing himself for dropping his rifle. They were completely exposed, silhouetted against the burning house. Another shot cracked through the night, this one closer. The barn. Samuel shouted, half carrying Lydia as they ran. Her feet were bleeding again, leaving dark stains on the dirt, but she did not make a sound of complaint. They burst through the barn door, and Samuel slammed it shut behind them, looking desperately for something to barricade it with. "Samuel." Lydia's voice was tight with fear. "What do? We get out of here." He moved to his horse's stall, quickly throwing on a saddle with practiced efficiency. His hands shook with adrenaline and rage. Frank Carson had just made this personal in a way that could not be forgiven. "Can you ride?" "I will manage." He led his horse out, then went back for another. Most of his cattle were in the pasture, safe from the flames, but his house, his home, the place his parents had built, was burning to the ground. The loss hit him like a physical blow, but there was no time to process it now. Survival first, grief later. They mounted up, Samuel pulling Lydia onto the horse in front of him since she could barely stand, let alone ride alone. He kicked the horse into motion, bursting out of the barn at a gallop. More shots followed them, but in the darkness and confusion, none found their mark. Samuel rode hard, his arms around Lydia to keep her steady, his mind racing through options. They could not go to town, not with Frank and his men possibly waiting there. The Peterson ranch was too close, too obvious. That left the mountains rough territory where horses would be difficult to track in the dark. He turned east toward the foothills, trusting his horse to find its footing in the darkness. Behind them, the glow of the burning house faded into the distance, and the shooting stopped. But Samuel knew they were not safe. Frank would wait for dawn and then come after them with a vengeance. They rode for hours, pushing the horses as hard as he dared in the dark. Lydia leaned back against his chest, her body shaking with cold and shock. Samuel wrapped his coat around her as best he could, his own body heat warming her against the chill night air. Finally, as the eastern sky began to lighten with approaching dawn, Samuel found what he was looking for. A narrow canyon with a small cave tucked into the rock face, hidden by scrub brush and barely large enough for 2 people and their horses. It was a place he had discovered years ago while tracking a lost calf, and he had always thought it would make a good hiding spot. He dismounted and helped Lydia down, then led the horses into the cave. There was just enough room for all of them, though they would be cramped. Lydia sank to the ground, her face pale and drawn with exhaustion and pain. "Let me see your feet," Samuel said, pulling off his coat and using it to cushion the hard stone floor. She had torn open all the healing wounds from their frantic flight, and blood soaked through the remains of her bandages. He used water from his canteen to clean them as best he could, wishing desperately for his medical supplies that had burned with his house. "I am so sorry," Lydia whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Your home, everything you had, it is gone because of me." "It is gone because of him," Samuel corrected firmly, cupping her face in his hands and forcing her to meet his eyes. "Not you, him. Do not take responsibility for the actions of evil men. But if I had never come to your door, then I would still be alone in that house, existing but not really living. You woke something up in me, Lydia, something I thought was dead. I would burn 100 houses to keep you safe." She stared at him, her breath catching. "Samuel," he kissed her. It was sudden and impulsive and probably terrible timing, but he could not help himself. She was in his arms, alive despite everything that had tried to destroy her, and he needed her to know how he felt before anything else could go wrong. For a heartbeat, she froze. Then she kissed him back with a fierceness that spoke of her own tangled emotions, her own desperate need for connection and hope. Her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and he wrapped his arms around her, mindful of her injuries but unable to maintain any real distance. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you," he said simply. "I know it is crazy, I know the timing is impossible, but I need you to know that before anything else happens." Lydia's eyes were wet with tears, but she was smiling. "I am falling in love with you too. I have been since you carried me to your bed and looked at me like I mattered, like I was a person and not just property. I thought I would never feel this way about anyone. What do we do about it?" Samuel asked. "We survive," she said firmly. "We get through this and then we figure out the rest. Together." "Together," he agreed, sealing the promise with another kiss. They spent the day hidden in the cave, taking turns keeping watch while the other slept. Samuel's mind worked constantly, trying to develop a plan. They could not stay here indefinitely. They had limited water, no food beyond what he had in his saddlebags, and Frank would be scouring the territory for them. The smart thing would be to wait until dark, and then make a run for Colorado, bypassing Cody entirely. But that meant abandoning the plan James had been setting up, cutting off their safest route to California. It also meant traveling rough country with Lydia's feet in terrible condition and limited supplies. "What are you thinking?" Lydia asked from where she sat wrapped in his coat, watching him pace the small confines of the cave. "I am thinking we need help, and I do not know where to get it." Samuel ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Frank burned my house, which means he knows I was hiding you. That makes me as much a target as you now. Even if we get you away safely, I cannot go back to Cody. I would be arrested or killed. Then come with me." Lydia struggled to her feet, wincing but determined. "Come to California. Start over somewhere new, somewhere Lawrence's reach does not extend. We can build a life together." Samuel looked at her, at the hope and fear and love shining in her green eyes, and felt his heart twist. It was everything he wanted and everything he was afraid of, all wrapped up in one terrifying, exhilarating package. "You are sure?" he asked. "You barely know me. What if what?" She crossed the small space between them and took his hands. "What if it does not work out? What if we are making a mistake? Samuel, I have spent 5 years living in fear, playing it safe, and all it got me was more pain and more fear. I would rather take a chance on something real, even if it might fail, than spend the rest of my life wondering what could have been." He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully but firmly. "Then we go together. Once we figure out how to get out of this canyon alive." As if in answer to his words, the sound of horses echoed from the canyon entrance. Multiple horses, moving slowly, searching. Samuel grabbed his rifle and positioned himself at the mouth of the cave, using the brush as cover. Lydia pulled the pistol he had given her earlier, her hands steady despite the fear in her eyes. They waited, barely breathing, as the sounds grew closer. Samuel counted at least 4 horses, maybe more, too many to fight if it came to that. He tightened his finger on the trigger, preparing to sell their lives dearly if necessary. Then a familiar voice called out, loud and clear. "Samuel Whitmore, if you are in this canyon, show yourself." "I am here to help, James Hartford." Relief and suspicion warred in Samuel's chest. How had James found them? And was he really here to help, or had Frank somehow gotten to him? "How do I know I can trust you?" Samuel called back, not revealing his exact position. "Because I brought the sheriff and 4 deputies with me," James replied. "Frank Carson and his men are in custody. You are safe to come out." Samuel exchanged a glance with Lydia. It could be a trick, but Frank did not seem the type for elaborate deceptions. He preferred direct violence. Making a decision, Samuel stepped out from behind the brush, rifle still ready. What he saw made him lower the weapon in shock. James sat on his horse at the head of a group that included not just the sheriff, but also Mayor Thompson and several of Cody's most prominent citizens. And behind them, hands bound and faces furious, were Frank Carson and his 2 companions. "What happened?" Samuel asked, helping Lydia out of the cave. Sheriff Tom Bradley dismounted and walked over, his weathered face grim. "What happened is that Frank made a fatal mistake. He assumed no one would care about a stranger passing through. But when we saw the smoke from your ranch and went to investigate, we found these 3 bragging in the saloon about smoking you out. Seems they thought they could do whatever they wanted because their boss had money and connections." "They thought wrong," Mayor Thompson added. "We might be a small town, but we do not tolerate people burning down our citizens' homes and attempting murder. I sent a telegram to Cheyenne this morning, to Governor Warren himself, explaining the situation. By now, Lawrence Zimmerman is probably being arrested for attempted murder and conspiracy." Samuel felt Lydia sag against him in relief. "He is really being arrested?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "He is," Sheriff Bradley confirmed. "And when we explain how he has been abusing his wife and sent men to kill her, he will face real consequences. You will need to testify, madam, but I promise you will be protected every step of the way." Lydia looked up at Samuel, her eyes shining with tears. "Is it really over?" "It is really over," he confirmed, hardly believing it himself. The ride back to Cody was surreal. Samuel kept expecting something else to go wrong, for Frank to break free or for more of Lawrence's men to appear. But nothing happened. They made it to town without incident, and Lydia was immediately taken to the doctor to have her feet properly treated while Samuel gave his statement to the sheriff. "Your ranch," Sheriff Bradley said sympathetically as they finished up. "I am sorry, Samuel. I know that place meant a lot to you." "It did," Samuel agreed, "but it was just a house and some buildings. They can be rebuilt. What matters is that Lydia is safe." The sheriff studied him with knowing eyes. "She means something to you." "Everything," Samuel said simply. "She means everything." Over the next few weeks, the story unfolded in ways Samuel could never have predicted. Lawrence Zimmerman was indeed arrested, and when investigators looked into his affairs, they found evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and blackmail alongside the charges of domestic violence and attempted murder. His first wife's death was reopened as a suspicious case. His business empire crumbled, and his influential friends abandoned him to save themselves. Lydia testified against him in a trial that made headlines across Wyoming and beyond. Samuel sat beside her every day, holding her hand while she recounted the years of abuse and fear. It was painful to watch her relive those memories, but he also saw her grow stronger with each word, reclaiming her power and her voice. Lawrence Zimmerman was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Frank Carson and his men received 10 years each. Justice, imperfect but real, had been served. Through it all, Samuel and Lydia grew closer. She stayed with the doctor and his wife in Cody, recovering from her injuries while Samuel worked on plans to rebuild his ranch. They spent every possible moment together, talking and dreaming and falling deeper in love. One evening, as they sat on the porch of the boarding house where Lydia was staying, watching the sun set over the mountains, Samuel took her hand. "I do not have much to offer right now," he said. "My house is gone. My savings are going toward rebuilding, and I am probably the subject of more gossip than this town has seen in years. But I love you, Lydia Zimmerman. I love your courage, your strength, your kindness. I love the way you laugh and the way you challenge me. I love who I am when I am with you." He pulled a simple gold band from his pocket, one that had belonged to his mother. "Will you marry me? Will you help me rebuild not just my ranch but my life?" Lydia's face was radiant with joy. "Yes," she said, not a moment's hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you. I will build a life with you, Samuel Whitmore. I will love you and stand beside you through whatever comes. Yes." He slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, as if the universe itself was celebrating their happiness. They were married a month later in a simple ceremony at the church in Cody, with James Hartford standing as Samuel's best man and the doctor's wife as Lydia's matron of honor. Half the town attended, curious about the couple whose dramatic story had become local legend. But Samuel only had eyes for his bride, beautiful in a simple white dress, her dark hair woven with wildflowers, her green eyes shining with love and hope. As he said his vows, promising to love and cherish her for the rest of his days, Samuel thought about how much his life had changed in just a few short months. He had gone from a lonely man hiding from the world to someone with a future bright with possibility. All because a woman had collapsed in his doorway and he had chosen to catch her. The rebuilding of the ranch took nearly a year. Samuel and Lydia lived in a small cabin on the property while they worked, side by side, to construct a new house. It was larger than the old one with room to grow, built with lumber that James helped them purchase at cost, and labor donated by neighbors who had been moved by their story. Lydia proved to be a natural rancher's wife, taking to the work with enthusiasm and surprising skill. She learned to ride despite her initial fear, to help with the cattle, to manage the household finances. She planted a garden that flourished under her care, and she filled their temporary cabin and later their new house with laughter and warmth. Samuel had never been happier. Every morning he woke to find her beside him, and every night he fell asleep holding her close. The loneliness that had haunted him for 8 years was gone, replaced by a deep contentment he had never thought to experience. 2 years after their wedding, Lydia gave birth to their first child, a healthy baby boy they named Thomas Samuel Whitmore. Samuel held his son for the first time with shaking hands and tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by the love he felt for this tiny person and the woman who had given him such an incredible gift. "He is perfect," Lydia said from the bed, exhausted but glowing. "We made something perfect together." "We did," Samuel agreed, sitting beside her and placing the baby in her arms. "Thank you For him, for everything, for saving my life as much as I saved yours." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat together, their little family complete, watching their son sleep peacefully. 3 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Emily Rose, who had her mother's green eyes and her father's stubborn determination. The house filled with the sounds of children laughing and playing, with the organized chaos of family life. Samuel expanded the ranch, making it prosperous and successful, finally achieving the dreams he had abandoned years before. But more than the material success, more than the land or cattle or money in the bank, what mattered to Samuel was the love he shared with Lydia and their children. Every day was a gift, every moment precious. He never took it for granted, never forgot how close he had come to missing all of this because he was too afraid to open his heart. One evening, when Thomas was 7 and Emily was 4, Samuel and Lydia sat on the porch of their home, watching their children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. The mountains rose in the distance, purple against the darkening sky, and the air smelled of sage and summer grass. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Lydia asked, her hand finding his as naturally as breathing. "If I had collapsed somewhere else, or if you had not been home, or if you had turned me away." "All the time," Samuel admitted. "And it terrifies me how easily I could have missed this, missed you, missed everything that makes life worth living." "But you did not," she said, squeezing his hand. "You were exactly where you needed to be, exactly when you needed to be there. You caught me when I fell in more ways than one, and you have been catching me ever since." "And you caught me right back," he replied, turning to look at her. After 10 years together, she was even more beautiful to him than she had been that first night, weathered by sun and wind and life but radiant with happiness. "I was falling long before I met you. I just did not realize it until you were there to break my fall." They kissed as the stars began to emerge overhead, their children's laughter ringing through the Wyoming evening like music. This was what happiness looked like, Samuel thought. Not the absence of hardship or pain, but the presence of love strong enough to weather any storm. As the years passed, their love only deepened. They added 2 more children to their family, another boy and another girl, and watched all 4 grow into strong, capable adults. They weathered droughts and hard winters, cattle diseases and economic downturns, always together, always supporting each other. Samuel's hair turned gray, and lines deepened around Lydia's eyes, but she was still the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Every morning, he thanked whatever force had brought her to his doorway that fateful night. Every evening, he held her close and counted his blessings. Their children married and had children of their own, and Samuel and Lydia's home became the gathering place for family celebrations and holidays. They sat at the head of a table that groaned under the weight of food, surrounded by the faces of people who existed because they had found each other, because he had caught her when she fell and refused to let her go. When Samuel was 65 and Lydia 57, they took a trip back to that canyon where they had hidden so many years before. The cave was still there, weathered but unchanged, a silent witness to one of the most important moments of their lives. "This is where you told me you were falling in love with me," Lydia said, standing at the entrance and looking out at the vast Wyoming landscape spread before them. "This is where we decided to fight for our future," Samuel corrected, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Where we chose hope over fear. Best decision we ever made." "Second best," he said with a smile. "The best was when you said yes to marrying me." She laughed and turned in his arms to kiss him. "You old romantic. After all these years, you still know exactly what to say." After all these years, it only gets easier to say it because it only gets more true. They stood there for a long time, two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built a life more beautiful than either had dreamed possible. The sun was warm on their faces, and the wind carried the scent of wildflowers and sage. In the distance, they could see their ranch, their legacy, the physical manifestation of their love and hard work. "No regrets?" Samuel asked softly. "Not a single one," Lydia replied with absolute certainty. "You gave me everything, Samuel. Safety, love, a family, a life worth living. You saw me when I was broken and helped me become whole again." "We did that for each other," he said. "I was just as broken, just as lost. We healed each other." As they rode back to the ranch that afternoon, Samuel thought about the young man he had been, lonely and afraid of connection, convinced that solitude was safer than risking his heart. That man seemed like a stranger now. Love had transformed him, had given him courage and purpose and joy beyond measure. Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the celebrations of family milestones. Samuel and Lydia grew old together with grace and gratitude, their hands always finding each other, their love a constant in an ever-changing world. On their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, Samuel stood to give a toast. His hair was white now, his body marked by decades of ranch work, but his eyes were bright and his voice was strong. 50 years ago," he began, "a woman collapsed in my doorway. I caught her, carried her to my bed, and in doing so caught my own salvation. Lydia, you have been my partner, my love, my reason for everything good in my life. You taught me that love is not something to fear, but something to embrace with both hands and never let go. These 50 years have been the greatest adventure of my life, and if I had it to do over again, I would not change a single moment. Here is to 50 more years, my darling, though I know that is greedy. Here is to every moment we have left, and to the love that will outlast even our lifetimes in the family we built together." Lydia stood beside him, tears streaming down her face, and raised her glass. "To love," she said simply, "to second chances and new beginnings. To the man who caught me when I fell and never let me go. To my Samuel." To Samuel and Lydia. The room chorused, glasses clinking and voices raised in celebration. That night, lying in bed with Lydia curled against his side as she had been for 50 years, Samuel reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From that terrifying night when she collapsed in his doorway, through the danger and uncertainty that followed, to this moment of perfect peace and contentment. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "I love you too," she murmured back, already half asleep. "Always and forever." "Always and forever," he agreed, holding her close as sleep claimed them both. Samuel Whitmore lived to be 82 years old, and Lydia was by his side until the very end. When he passed peacefully in his sleep one quiet spring morning, he left behind a legacy of love and family that spread across Wyoming and beyond. At his funeral, his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren told stories of a man who had been kind and strong and devoted, who had worked hard and loved deeply, who had built something lasting from the ashes of tragedy. But the story they told most often, the one that became family legend passed down through generations, was the story of how it all began. How their grandmother had collapsed from exhaustion in their grandfather's doorway, how he had caught her and carried her to his bed, and how that single act of compassion had changed both their lives forever. Lydia lived for 3 more years after Samuel's death, and though she missed him every day, she was not sad. How could she be sad when she had been given such an incredible gift? 53 years with the love of her life, 4 wonderful children, 14 grandchildren, and 21 great-grandchildren at the time of Samuel's passing. She had lived to see the 20th century arrive, had witnessed automobiles and telephones and all manner of modern marvels, but none of it compared to the marvel of the love she and Samuel had shared. On a warm June day in 1937, Lydia Whitmore passed away peacefully at the age of 77, surrounded by family. She was buried beside Samuel on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, under a sky so blue it seemed to go on forever. On her gravestone, beneath her name and dates, was carved a simple inscription that her children had chosen. She fell, and he caught her. Together they soared. The ranch continued through the generations, each new family adding their own chapter to the story while honoring the legacy of Samuel and Lydia. The original house they built still stood, lovingly maintained, a testament to their hard work and dedication. And in the main room, hanging above the fireplace, was a painting commissioned by their children shortly after Samuel's death. It depicted a younger Samuel carrying an unconscious Lydia through a doorway, her body limp in his arms, his face set with determination and an emerging tenderness. Below the painting, in a frame of polished wood, was the story written in Lydia's own hand, composed during the last year of her life as a gift for her descendants. It told of her escape from Lawrence Zimmerman, of collapsing in Samuel's doorway, of him catching her and carrying her to bed. It told of falling in love against impossible odds, of building a life together from nothing, of the joy and challenges and ultimate triumph of choosing love over fear. The story ended with these words, penned in Lydia's elegant script: "To my children, grandchildren, and all who come after, never be afraid to catch someone when they fall. Never be afraid to fall and let yourself be caught." In those moments of vulnerability and courage, in the choice to help or to trust, lies the foundation for the greatest love stories. Your grandfather caught me when I had nothing left, when I was broken and afraid and running out of hope. He gave me everything, but more than that, he showed me that I was worth saving, worth loving, worth fighting for. In turn, I hope I gave him the same gift. Love is not always easy. Sometimes it requires sacrifice and bravery and faith in the face of uncertainty. But it is always, always worth it. The life we built together, the family we created, the love we shared for more than 5 decades, all of it started because one good man chose compassion over convenience, chose to open his door and his heart to a stranger in need. Be that person. Be the one who catches someone when they fall. Be the one who is brave enough to fall knowing you might not be caught. Take the risk. Choose love. It will change your life in ways you cannot imagine, in ways more beautiful than any dream. All my love now and always, Lydia Zimmerman Whitmore. And so the story passed into legend, a family treasure, a reminder of where they came from and the values that defined them. The ranch in Cody, Wyoming prospered through wars and depressions, through changing times and new generations. The land that Samuel had worked so hard to build up and protect continued to provide for his descendants, just as his love for Lydia continued to inspire them. On anniversaries and holidays, when the family gathered at the old homestead, someone would inevitably tell the story again. The details never changed because they were sacred, were true, were the foundation upon which everything else was built. She collapsed from exhaustion in his doorway. The cowboy caught her and carried her to bed. And from that moment of crisis and compassion bloomed a love story for the ages. In the end, that was the legacy Samuel and Lydia left behind. Not just land or money or even descendants, though all of those things were important. Their true legacy was the example they set, the proof they provided that love could heal, could transform, could turn strangers into soulmates, and a moment of kindness into a lifetime of happiness. Years turned into decades and decades into a century, but the story never faded. It remained fresh and vital, a touchstone for the family, a reminder that the most important things in life are the connections we make and the love we share. Samuel and Lydia's great-great-grandchildren told the story to their children, and those children would tell it to theirs, an unbroken chain stretching back to that fateful night in 1884 when everything changed. The ranch itself became a historical landmark, preserved and protected, a living museum to a way of life that had largely disappeared but was never forgotten. Tourists came from all over to see the place where the legendary love story had unfolded, to walk the same ground Samuel and Lydia had walked, to stand in the doorway where she had collapsed and imagine that moment when their fates became intertwined. But for the family, it was never about fame or recognition. It was about honoring two people who had loved each other so completely, so faithfully, that their love echoed through time. It was about remembering that everyone deserves to be caught when they fall, that compassion and courage can change the world one life at a time. The house Samuel built still stood strong, weathering storms and seasons, its foundation solid and true, just like the love that had inspired its construction. The bed where he had laid Lydia that first night, where he had tended her injuries and kept watch over her, was preserved as a cherished relic. The land stretched out in all directions, beautiful and wild and free, a fitting testament to two people who had fought for their freedom and found something even more precious in each other. And on quiet evenings, when the wind swept down from the mountains and the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors, it was easy to imagine them still there. Samuel on the porch with his rifle across his lap, keeping watch over everything he held dear. Lydia beside him, her hand in his, their love a tangible presence that lingered in every board and beam of the house they built, in every acre of land they worked, in every heartbeat of every descendant they created. She had collapsed from exhaustion in his doorway. He had caught her and carried her to bed. And in doing so, they had written a love story that would never end, that would live on in the hearts and minds of all who came after them. An eternal reminder that love is always worth fighting for, that kindness can change everything, and that sometimes the most broken people can heal each other and build something beautiful from the ruins of their past. This was their story. This was their legacy. This was the proof that love conquers all, that hope survives even the darkest nights, and that two souls can find each other against impossible odds and create a life worth living, worth celebrating, worth remembering forever. In the end, that is all anyone can hope for, to love and be loved, to matter to someone, to leave the world better than they found it. Samuel and Lydia Whitmore did all of that and more. They proved that heroes come in many forms, that bravery is not just about physical courage, but about opening your heart when it would be safer to keep it closed. They showed generations of their family what real love looks like, not just in the grand gestures but in the everyday moments of kindness and connection, and choosing each other again and again. Their story began with a woman collapsing from exhaustion and a cowboy catching her, but it became so much more than that. It became a testament to the power of love to heal and transform, a blueprint for building a life of meaning and purpose, and a gift that kept giving long after they were gone. And if you stand on that hill overlooking the ranch at sunset, if you close your eyes and listen carefully, you can almost hear them still. His voice, low and steady, promising to protect her. Her voice, soft and strong, promising to stand beside him. The sound of their laughter mixing with the wind, the echo of their love resonating through time itself. She collapsed from exhaustion in his doorway. He caught her and carried her to bed, and together they built forever.